Story 1, Ethan had been on me for weeks. Dude, just one night. Lone Ridge is nothing. You're making it bigger than it is. He pitched it like an adventure I'd regret missing. The kind of story I'd want to use later. I brushed him off at first, partly because I wasn't in the mood for a campfire folklore, but also because of a strange instinct I couldn't shake. A quiet hum inside me that said, "Don't go." But Ethan was relentless. That Saturday, he showed up at my door with a cracked lantern, a dented thermos full of whiskey, and the cocky grin of someone who knew they'd won. I gave in. The trail wasn't. Far just beyond the strip of forestland nobody really managed anymore. People in town all had their own version of its story. Some claimed they'd seen their own double standing silently between the trees. Others said the place mirrored your steps, like the woods themselves were learning how to walk. One man swore he heard his wife's voice calling from the dark, even though she was at home asleep. I laughed when I first heard these tales, but when locals told them, there was always that edge. A kind of reluctance, like they weren't joking, but didn't want to remember either. We started down the path just after dusk. Ethan loved night hikes, said it made legends more fun. My lantern sputtered. Dim yellow glow flickering like a dying firefly. He mocked me when I smacked it, his voice louder than it should have been in the stillness. The first stretch felt normal pines on both sides, crunch of leaves underfoot. But after a while, I noticed what wasn't there. No crickets, no wind, no skitter of squirrels in the brush. The silence wasn't natural. It was too heavy, like the whole forest had been smothered. Ethan kept talking, pointing out old storm damage and forks where the path used to split. He claimed he'd been here before. When I asked if he'd seen anything strange, he just grinned and said, "Other than your haircut." Now, that was the last joke either of us made. The trail sloped upward, the climb pulling at our legs. Soon the trees began to bend in odd ways just slightly, but enough that they seemed to be leaning toward one another. Arched overhead, their branches wove together like a ceiling, as though the forest wanted to shut us in. I muttered, "Feels like the woods are listening." Ethan didn't laugh this time. His steps slowed. His light stayed steady, but his posture changed. Then he stopped, dead still. "You hear that?" His whisper made my skin prickle. I froze, at first. Nothing. Then I caught it. Delayed sounds, our footsteps had ended. But the forest wasn't done. Something else shuffled, half a beat too late. The air seemed to ripple with it. I turned the lantern back down the path. Its glow collapsed against the close-back trunks, shadows pressing thick as curtains. My chest felt like it was locked in a vice. That's when I saw it. Not a trick of the eye, not a shadow. It was standing maybe 20 yards back, in the center of the trail. A figure man-shaped, but wrong. Too long in the arms, too tall in the legs. Its movements twitched, delayed. When Ethan shifted his weight, it shifted seconds later, like a reflection struggling to catch up. But its body didn't bend like ours. Knees hinged backward, arms swung like broken hinges. It didn't walk, it jerked forward, smooth then stuttering, like film skipping on an old projector. Ethan whispered, "That's us." And it was, twisted copies of our gestures, mirrored back out of sync. I bolted. Branches whipped my arms as we tore through the dark. The path warped round us, the ground dipping where it hadn't before, trees leaning harder. The woods closing, like a fist, and always behind us, the sound footsteps that weren't chasing, just imitating, a fraction too late. I tripped once, skinning my knees, lantern spinning into the brush. Ethan dragged me up, both of us running blind. Finally, We burst into the clearing where his cabin sat, half swallowed in fog. Gravel bit my palms as I collapsed. Neither of us said a word. We didn't sleep. We just waited until morning broke. By daylight, the trail looked ordinary again. No bent trees, no wrongness. We convinced ourselves to walk it once more, just to prove it hadn't been real. But then we saw them, the prints, 3 sets. Us and another, perfectly aligned, perfectly placed. Not deep enough to carry weight, not a single scuff. Just clean impressions, like something had followed without ever touching the ground. We backed away, step by careful step. I never set foot on Lone Ridge again. A month later, I left town altogether. New job, new city, new start. But sometimes, when I'm walking alone at night, I swear I still hear it. Those faint footsteps, landing just after mine. Story twice signed in under that name at the trail kiosk, marked solo, and pushed off from the gravel onto the faint line snaking toward the ridges. I always carry backup map, compass, extra batteries, and a GPS that leaves digital breadcrumbs every few seconds. The back roads here twist and turn far more than they should. Locals share warnings you scoff at until experience proves them true. Never trust a trail unless it appears onto maps. Never stick your head through a door with no clear exit. Never linger in something that only recently became old. I don't believe in superstition, but I respect rules forged by mistakes. The first few miles were straightforward. A neglected logging path narrowed into twin ruts before giving way to a corridor of trampled weeds. My intended route peeled off at a subtle angle, as if the earth itself had decided halfway through that it didn't want to follow the previous path. I'd marked that turn weeks ago on a reconnaissance loop along another ridge. Back then, it looked like an animal's path. It still did. My plan was simple. Follow that thread for a few hours, recall it, and return to the highway before nightfall. But the path thinned faster than I'd expected. It wove through dense underbrush, crossed a shallow gully littered with broken branches, then climbed a slope dotted with crooked fence posts. Occasionally, the trail disappeared entirely, only to reappear a few feet later. I paused to align the gaps, estimating where it might resurface. After a couple hours, I found the only sign of human passage, a single shoe print pressed into damp clay. They didn't follow the trail consistently, vanishing and reappearing a dozen steps ahead. I logged a waypoint each time, a little obsessive, perhaps, but it kept me honest. The trail climbed, eased along a side slope, and opened into a clearing that felt almost deliberate. The ground was scraped, stones shifted, as if someone had tried to guide the way, and there were footprints dozens, overlapping, varied weight, varied tread, sharp enough that they hadn't crumbled. Too fresh to ignore. Looking up, I saw why. At the clearing's edge, a cabin leaned askew, its roof sagging and door off-center, boarded in the hollow grey way decades of neglect can manage. The threshold wasn't even seated on the stone base. And the footprints lead to a place, clearly abandoned. I didn't advance without backup. I plotted a bearing to the nearest ridge on my map, a northeast spine connecting to a known trail, and jotted the numbers on my forearm. I bookmarked the cabin on both GPS and paper before moving closer. The nearer I got, the more unsettling it became. The door swayed on rusted hinges despite the still air inside. The floor was buckled, animal tracks crisscrossing the threshold. A human could enter only at the risk of spraining an ankle. I leaned forward, searching for safe steps, perhaps 3 deliberate ones before the next plank collapsed. I decided my bones would remain outside. The prints told a story. They pressed heavily around the cabin, then fanned out toward the tree line and disappeared. Some led a few steps inside before retreating. Then I noticed him, a man in plain clothes, cap low, Leaning against a tree on the clearing's edge, I wasn't as unnerved as expected. What unsettled me was his silence. I raised a hand and said, "Hey." He moved not toward me, but away, disappearing over a slope that promised twisted ankles. I called again. "Nothing. I don't chase people into train that decides your fate. Instead," I repositioned, putting the cabin between us, and retraced. My steps, the GPS shifted as I walked, breadcrumb trails layering over themselves. Like the device had learned something new. I shrugged. Satellite error, canopy interference, human mistake. Nothing paranormal. I emerged onto the logging road, later than planned, but without panic, signed out at the gate, and drove straight to the county station. Report: isolated cabin, unknown ownership, evidence of recent human activity. One man observed at distance who vanished. I supplied coordinates and my track. The deputy promised to pass it to county forestry and asked if I could guide a team. I agreed. Days later, a small team met me at the gate. The deputy, a volunteer familiar with these backlines, and local guides who moved as if born here. No speeches, just purpose. I led. We traced the old road, found the faint turn, and navigated the same obstacles I'd logged. Some landmarks appeared slightly shifted stumps. Fence gaps, but mostly lined up. The terrain seemed subtly altered, as if it refused to stay still. Dotted the clearing. The footprint chaos had vanished, leaving churned earth. The cabin itself was gone. A low mound of ash and collapsed timbers marked its former place, precisely where it had stood. The volunteer circled cautiously. The locals inspected the edges. Coordinates matched my notes. One crouched, prodded ash, shook his head. Nobody questioned the disappearance. The deputy radioed updates, then asked me to check the perimeter. Boot prints ring the mound. A mix of hikers, work boots, narrow tracks. A 6-stride sequence ended in bare clay missing. The 7th, I noted it. We searched outward for a trail, creek, or haul-off point. Nothing. The volunteers tried west with the same result. The locals exchanged a glance. Things that shouldn't remain rarely do. Eventually, the deputy radioed off, and we prepared to leave. The return route wasn't a mirror. Paths had shifted. Brush intruded where none had been. Compass, GPS, map steady train was not. We adjusted, following proven bearings over shape. Minor discrepancies appeared, but nothing unmanageable. At the last leaning post before the road, I paused and checked my gear. Knife, whistle, spare compass, peeper map, phone, GPS, backup headlamp. Medkit, water, snacks, jacket, cord, tape, lighter, spare lighter. Habit, not ritual. The deputy mirrored me. The volunteer checked pockets. The locals were already downhill. We reached the gate in daylight. Names logged. Handshakes exchanged. I requested a copy of the report. 2 mornings later, I checked the trailhead office for a demolition or burn permits. Nothing. I left my contact info back at my car. I gazed at the ridge, then traced a new GPS line through the valley. I pressed my hand over the screen, then revealed it to let the light guide me. I drove home, leaving that ridge behind, and never returned. Story 3. I was just a few years older than I'd like to admit. The plan was simple. A smooth 30-minute drive on the highway. 1 fuel stop, and I'd reach my cousin Garrett's place in Ridgewood before nightfall. That's it. Predictable. And maybe that's why I started doubting it almost immediately. Stop, dash, and go traffic has always frayed my nose. It leaves a restless itch that only distraction can scratch. So when I spotted a narrow back road cutting into the Blue Ridge Mountains that morning, it looked like a perfect opportunity. Maybe I could shave off a few minutes, A shortcut, I told myself. One I should have ignored the moment I committed. My phone bars winked out one by one. Nothing. No GPS. No music. No navigation cues from the car. Just the road and a faint hope that it actually led somewhere. The asphalt gave way to gravel, then to deep ruts lined with loose stones. My headlights sliced through the darkness, every tree trunk morphing into a pillar in some underground tunnel. Round each bend, it felt like the road folded in on itself. I flicked on the radio static. Nothing else. I tried to keep calm. I muttered to myself, cracked a half-hearted joke. Well, at least it's quiet, I said aloud. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It pressed, heavy and empty, against my chest. Then I saw it, a weathered sign, leaning, partially hidden by weeds, wood splintered, paint faded. I slowed to read it, Ashford Hollow. I blinked, repeated the words under my breath, Ashford Hollow. I'd spent my whole life in these pots, every back road, every detour during family trips, I knew. Yet this name was fun. My GPS didn't recognize it. My cousin hadn't mentioned it. But something tugged at me, demanded a look. So I turned. The road pinched round my wheels. The deeper I drove, the more reality seemed to dissolve. Silence reigned. No birds, no insects. No rustling leaves, just the crunch of tires and a strange pressure at the edge of my vision. Time itself seemed to pause. Then the road opened into a clearing. I expected nothing. Instead, there were cabins 6, maybe 7, squat and hunched like they'd been abandoned mid-motion, but somehow still standing, sagging loose, cracked wood. And one faint wisp of smoke rising from a crooked chimney, barely visible. Almost dreamlike, I killed the engine. Gravel crunched under my boots. The air was thick, almost viscous. Hello. I called. My voice cracked. Just trying to get back to Route 9. Nothing. No response. I edged closer to the nearest cabin. Its door sagged, swinging slowly, deliberately. Then a man appeared, tall but stooped, shoulders cold as if carrying invisible weight. His hair was long, matted, dusted with grey, skin ashen, almost powdered. Clothes coarse, stitched by hand. The kind you read about in old folklore but never expect to see. His eyes caught my headlight stall. Metallic, flat and unblinking. Evening, I said, trying to sound steady. Can you tell me the way back to Charleston? No blink, slow, deliberate breaths. Then more appeared, to women, faces hollow, hair pulled taut as if painfully, and children barefoot, heads tilted slightly. Listening to something deep in the earth, my chest seized. I'll go, I stammered. Backing up, gravel slipped beneath my heels. I lunged for the car. Door slammed. Engine sputtered to life as my fingers rattled on the keys. Then I saw them. Figures lining the tree-line, men, women, children, all ragged, all staring. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. The man at the cabin stepped fully into view. His mouth opened, and a sound poured out. Not a voice, a fractured, gurgling roar. Like glass shattering inside metal. Beneath it, a low, hollow animal growl. Others joined in. Faces, bodies, noises, a chorus of wrongness, each note heavy with agony. I slammed the gear into reverse. Gravel flew. Tires skidded. Trees blurred past. Shapes darted in my headlights, always there, always watching. I didn't look back. Then, suddenly, the world snapped. Pavement, smooth asphalt, the hum of tires. On the highway, my phone lit up. Buzz restored. The familiar world switched on round me, as if Ashford Hollow had never existed. Story asterisk 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 for asterisk 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 asterisk. I've never been one to jump at creeks or lose sleep over campfire tales. But what happened near the Ridgevale stretch of the Blue Brush Range still wakes me in a panic. It started after I quit my job burned out, exhausted. My cousin Jory offered me his family's old hunting shack, the old place, abandoned for years, deep in the hills. He left a key in a rusted tin and a hand-drawn map, a single line. Winding through the forest, the drive up was endless. Narrow dirt road, dense trees pressing in, air growing thick and heavy. The cabin finally appeared, leaning, moss crawling up its sides. Set in a hollow that even the wind seemed afraid to enter. Inside was bare, a cot, iron stove, a wobbly table, one chair. No electricity, no plumbing, just quiet at first. It felt like peace by the 5th day. The air had changed. I felt watched. Behind the cabin, a faint trail led over the ridge. I packed light and followed it. Trees grew taller, spaced, too evenly, bark pale, trunks stretching unnaturally. At the top, a clearing opened a perfect oval of knee-high stones, pristine, almost alive. I kept my distance, set up a small fire, and tried to ignore them. After midnight came the humming, faint, disjointed, coming from all round, then footsteps dragging, circling the clearing. No voices, no lights, just deliberate, patient movements. The sound persisted until dawn. I packed and tried to leave, but the trail